welcome everyone to the first of a reinvention workshop series, and that's put on by my business, Power Purpose Play. And I know we had said lunch and learn, but I know a lot of you are in not in Eastern time, so it might be a breakfast and learn. So I apologize for that. You know, through today's workshop and through many more that are coming up, we're going to learn practical ways about how to reinvent ourselves in different areas of our lives. So that's really the theme for the workshop series. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kavita, and I am the founder of Power Purpose Play. I mentioned before, I live in Oakville, Ontario, and married, 2 kids, two grown boys, and I just introduced a new puppy into our home, so that's brought a lot of joy into our lives. And actually, I'd love it if you guys, if you could come in and introduce yourself on the chat. Just maybe tell us one fun thing about you, and maybe why you chose to join us today, and maybe what you're hoping to gain. So if you want to throw some comments in the chat, that would be wonderful, and then we can address that later. But so before I introduce our amazing guest today, I thought I'd just give you a bit of a background of who I am, why I'm here, and what Power Purpose Play is. So I guess I can tell you that on the topic of reinvention, I'm pretty experienced because I've really done it myself. I had a very successful career in the corporate pharmaceutical world for over 20 years. And now I'm an entrepreneur, and really my mission is to help connect women such as yourselves together to help you on your personal growth journey. So that's really my new mission in life. And even though I left corporate world quite recently, it's been kind of brewing over the last several years. So I come from an Indian background, so I've had followed kind of the traditional path of education, marriage, kids, and career, and I was very successful. Everything was great in my career. I won many awards, and I was just really on the top of my game. But so from the outside, it kind of seemed like I had it all, right? But something inside me just kind of told me that something was missing, and I don't know if you guys can relate to that. But about the time I turned 50, I just felt that there was more that I was meant to do. But I wasn't really sure exactly what that was. So, I was grateful, I was comfortable, but I definitely wasn't growing. So I don't know if many of you can relate to this, but perhaps there's something in your life, whether it's your career or maybe your relationship or something else, where you're comfortable, but maybe it's not exciting you that much anymore. And maybe you feel like a change. Nod your head if you agree. So that happened to me, and so I started to do my job quite robotically. I didn't feel like I was utilizing all my skills, so I did go on a personal growth journey. I did a lot of meditation, yoga, I read a lot of books, took a lot of courses, and I pursued my love of writing, and it all kind of led me to realizing that I really did need a change. And at the same time, I met so many women who were in the same age group, same age life stage as me, who also felt the same way. They had evolving priorities. They felt they had more to offer the world, but they just didn't know where to go, how to do that. And so they were also held back by limiting beliefs like, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm too old, who am I to do this, I'm not qualified enough, and all those things that we put in our heads, right? So as a result of that, it just all of a sudden my mission really became very clear, and that is I wanted to create a platform for women such as yourselves to get together and to help you on your personal growth journey. And that's where I created Power Purpose Play. So I love human connection, and that's my superpower. That's what drives me. And so this is why I'm here to connect to you with resources and experts. So, help you on your next stage of your life and live it on your own terms. And, that's what we're going to be doing. So with Power Purpose Play, I'm holding, this is one of many workshops. We're going to be doing several of them. We're going to be telling stories of women who have actually, everyday women who have reinvented themselves for inspiration. We're going to be doing podcasts and webinars, and hopefully one day when we can all meet together live, we'll be doing live workshops as well. So I'm here to listen to you. So please, if you have any feedback, if there's any topics that you would like to learn about in the future, send me an email or just put it in the chat. My email is kavita@powerpurposeplay.ca. You can send me a message, and I'd love to hear from you and as this community grows. So just in terms of a little bit of logistics, the session today will run for about an hour, and we'll have Q&A at the end. So anytime, if you have any thoughts along the way, just throw them in the chat. And then also, if you could have like a pen and paper handy, because I know that Meg is going to be giving us a lot of great tips, so it might be useful for you to write those down. So without further ado, I will like to introduce our wonderful guest today, Meg Heppner. I met Meg through another women's network, and I was just immediately drawn by her positive personality and her enthusiasm, and we seem to have very similar missions, and that's why we resonated together so well. And so I thought it would be perfect to have her run us through today's session. And so Meg is a life coach. She's a blogger. She's an event host and a speaker. And she is passionate about walking with people that want more out of life than just the status quo. So similar to what I was just talking about. So she creates a space where women can slow down and process all the things that have controlled their lives, their everyday thoughts, emotions, and the stories they have been telling themselves. So Meg lives in BC with her husband and 2 teenage boys and their little dog, Charlie. So Meg will be discussing the topic of boundaries today, and especially how when we are navigating changes in life, how do we set new boundaries to build a life that supports our growth and our life purpose. So I'm really looking forward to learning from Meg today, and I'll take it over to her.
Awesome. Oh, I'm so excited. First of all, I'm just drinking all your faces in, the ones that I can see, because it's just so lovely to be able to do this and to be together. So I'm so thankful that you guys showed up for this. And I'm so excited because boundaries made a huge difference in my life. When Kavita was talking about wanting change but feeling stuck, or, not knowing what that next step was, or what do I do? I have so been there, and I found that finding boundaries for myself and really understanding how to actually set them totally changed my life. So I'm excited to talk about this, and I'm excited that this is going to be something that hopefully will really make a difference in your life as well. So I will actually, before we keep going, I'm actually going to screen share because I have a PowerPoint. Okay. And that way you guys can all see what I'm talking about. Okay, awesome. Okay, so like many women, I grew up conditioned to be the person who sacrificed. I grew up being conditioned to say that others' needs were more important than mine, right? That ultimate people pleaser. And I was taught that my value came from how well I could serve other people, or how well I could make them a priority. And it wasn't overtly said to me, but there was always this idea that my experience or my feelings or my needs just didn't count as much as anyone else's. And that instead, if I wanted to find value, it was in sacrifice and in serving. And so I found myself in a situation where I was working long hours, more than I wanted to, because I didn't know how to say no. I found myself staying at a job that I actually hated because I didn't want to disappoint my employer. I found myself agreeing with whatever my husband wanted because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. And I found that being around family and friends was exhausting because I spent all of my time just caring about, are you okay? Are you comfortable? Are you feeling good? And when I would go home at night, I would just be exhausted. And so I basically spent my time overworked, on edge, anxious, nervous, unconnected with myself. and so, so tired. And I desperately wanted that change, and I desperately wanted my circumstances to be different. I just didn't know how to do it. And I was afraid that if I changed something, or if I set some type of boundary in place, that I would disappoint others. And obviously, the result of me living this way made me a doormat for most people. And people would take advantage of me. And I remember thinking, oh, if I'm nicer, or if I'm kinder, or if I did more, then they would stop doing that. Like, I just needed to give more. So really let that sink in for a second, that instead of people stepping on me or taking advantage of me and going, oh, I need to make massive changes here, I went, oh, I just need to do more of the same thing that I'm doing. And the crazy cherry on top was the environment that I grew up in told me that if I was this type of person that let people take advantage of me, that was tired and overworked and overcommitted, that I could feel good about myself because I could consider myself a good person, that all that suffering was worth it. And I bought that hook, line, and sinker. I totally believed that the more I gave and the more I gave up and the more I, just focused on other people, that eventually happiness would be mine and that I was a good person. The only thing is that absolutely never became my reality. So, hold on one second, that just didn't work. Okay, so what actually happened? Well, like I said, I actually did way more than I was comfortable with. I had felt like I was constantly performing in order to be worthy of love. I was completely disconnected from my own needs and my own wants and my desires. And I often felt so guilty for having them. And I had this false belief that if I gave enough and I did enough, I would actually have the life that I wanted. And I felt completely powerless and out of control. So that made it really difficult to know what I wanted. So if you're in that place where you're going, I want change, I want to do something different with my life, I want something to happen with my life that's different than what it is now, and you're living this life with no boundaries, you've almost set yourself up to this sort of impossible task. That if you're so disconnected from yourself, you're not going to know what you want. And when you don't know what you want, you're not going to make changes, right? So finding some boundaries for yourself is going to be so important for you to actually build that life that you want. But when you think of how miserable I was and how miserable we are without boundaries, we have to ask ourselves, how in the world do we get into this way of thinking? Like, why do we just buy into it? Why is it something that we fall for? And it seems to be that for most of us, when we lack boundaries or when we say yes very easily, it translates into us being instantly likable. My family and my friends loved it when I just said yes to everything and when I did all the extra work and when I took care of everything. And so did my employer. My employer thought that was amazing. He had no problems with me working long hours and all that kind of stuff. So I was important to them. And that feeling of likability and importance, it can be very intoxicating. And in the beginning, it can feel really good until it's no longer a choice, right? Until all of a sudden you go, oh, somehow I'm in a position where now I have to do this. I no longer can say no. And you don't want to lose that likability and that importance. And so you feel stuck in your own trap. And I remember this happened to me when my boys were very young. I would always say yes to having everyone else's kids at my house, right? My boys were young and I was like, oh no, just bring your kids over. Oh, just bring your kids over. If you have little kids and you've had that experience, you may have had that type of thing happen to you where you're like, no, just bring them. Or maybe someone was just always really open to you bringing their kids to your house. And then my kids hit school age and they went into school and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm finally going to have some time to make some changes, like to work on a passion. The only thing is the people that had been relying on me, they didn't want me to make that change because it was really convenient for them to bring kids to my house. And so I started to say, like, actually, I'm sorry, it doesn't suit me. The boys are in school now and etc. And people just got a little upset with that. And I was like, what do I do? And so the funny thing is my husband actually bought me a plaque or a little poster and he made me put it on the fridge and it said, have the courage to be disliked. And it was such a weird concept to me that was actually a positive thing to have someone dislike the thing that I was doing. But it was also very powerful in my life at that time. But still very, very difficult, very, very difficult to do that. So let's do a little check-in. Let's take a moment now. And I want you to close your eyes for a second. And if you have that pen and paper there, keep it close to you. But let's just all take a collective breath together, right? With our eyes closed, let's take that collective breath together. And I'm going to ask you a few questions. And I want you just to think of them at first. And once I'm finished asking, I'll prompt you. And I want you to write down the answers that come to your mind. It's important not to think or judge them, just not to think while you're writing, if you know what I mean, but just to write whatever comes to your mind. All right? So with your eyes closed, how often do you put the needs of others first, even if it's not really what you want, or it's not really in your best interest? How often do you put yourself down for not having the things in your life that you want? How often do you feel like there's nothing you can do about your situation or your relationship, that you feel stuck? How often do you feel like people don't respect you or value your skills enough? How often do you feel yourself going over and over an interaction in your head, not being able to let it go, but feeling like you're unable to say or do anything about it? What changes feel impossible? What feels out of reach? And I want you to open your eyes and grab that paper and pen, and I'll give you a minute, put my timer on, and write down whatever came to mind.
Did you want us to share, Meg?
Well, you know what? We can share at the end,
Okay.
just because, unless Kavita, you would like them to share, I'm fine with that. If someone wants to share something, that would be really interesting.
I don't mind, sure.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. Anybody can just unmute themselves if they want to share some thoughts. Oh, I can share.
Perfect. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think I often feel you know, as I was making this change in my life, this transition from my career to what I'm doing right now, people around me, it felt like there was a lot of skepticism and a lot of questioning as to why am I doing this? Because I have it so good. Why would you want to be doing something like that? So there was a lot of, not from everybody, but from some people, there was a lot of doubt. And so that always came up for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And isn't it funny that the voices of doubt always are so much louder than the voices of support in our heads, right?
Yes, yes.
It makes us doubt ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody?
I feel that in my profession, I can hold my own. I can be very assertive. But in my personal life, I tend to be like you, Matt, you know, trying to please the other one. That really, it was a big lesson for me. You know, I would never do that. But still, I find myself occasionally still doing this.
Yeah. And you know what? That's such an interesting thing, Chloe. That's so normal that people have really great boundaries in one area of their life, but really terrible ones in others. That actually comes up more often than you think. And it's just the different programming that we've had in childhood, where sometimes it's acceptable to stand up for yourself, like in the workplace, that's totally okay. But in relationship, it's not, right? And very often it's exactly the way you say it, actually, that most people are fine with speaking up for themselves at work, and then really struggle speaking up for themselves in relationships, in that intimate, because there's more vulnerability and there's more fear in those areas, right? So yeah, that totally makes a lot of sense. Does anyone else have anything to share? No? If not, that's totally fine. We can move on. Oops, for some reason I'm stuck. Why am I stuck? Okay. So it wasn't until I realized the importance of boundaries that things actually changed for me. So slowly but surely, I learned that setting boundaries would actually return my power to me. And that's the thing that's missing very often when we don't have boundaries, right? We feel like we're completely powerless. I realized that it would give me my self-esteem back. I didn't realize how much I didn't like myself, right? And sometimes we moralize these things like, why don't I have the life that I want? There must be something wrong with me. And so by putting boundaries in place, I actually just started to like myself more, which is an interesting concept. It gave me my time back, and it decreased my overwhelm and my anger and my resentment, because those things build up, right? Like it can be very easy to say, you know, I love people, and so I want to sacrifice and I want to do that, all those types of things. But inside of us, when there's no reciprocation or when there's nothing that takes care of us, that overwhelm, anger, and resentment is going to come no matter what. You can't get away from that. It also connected me to my authentic inner voice. I finally had this voice that I could hear, right? People talk about your inner knowing, and I was always like, what does that even mean? How does that even exist? And finally, as I was able to say, oh, I do know what that is, because I've actually put some boundaries in place that allow me to hear that. And you can start trusting that, right? And when you do that, it gives you clarity. Before that, when you don't hear your inner voice, you go, I don't know. So Kavita, like you were saying, like, I want to make these changes, but we can become overwhelmed with doubt when we don't connect with that inner voice that gives us that clarity that, no, this actually is the next step for me.
Right.
It also helped me build relationships that were more alive and vibrant. At first, it was a real struggle, but you actually get to know someone authentically when you set some boundaries, because they know the real you, not the fake you that just does everything that they want while secretly being resentful, but they actually get to know the real you, and you get to know the real them. So your relationships, I find that in all the things that change with boundaries, your relationships and the relationship with yourself is the thing that changes the most. And it allows us to actually build the world that we want to live in. Very often, and I think I spoke about this at the beginning of the slide, we feel powerless. We feel like, well, we just have to live in this world. There's nothing that we can do about it. And we forget that we're actually very powerful, and that we can create or take part in creating a much better world than the one that there is. So for me, when I didn't have boundaries, I was creating a world where it was okay to take advantage of people. It was okay that not everyone got an equal voice. It was okay that not everyone have an opportunity to pursue their passion or be in situations that fed their soul. And those are normally things I stand against. I stand against voices being silenced. I stand against, people being stuck in situations. But because I didn't have boundaries, I was allowing people to do that to me. So I was creating that life for myself. And I was also saying, it's okay in this world, right? And that feeling of powerlessness and just being at the whim of other people leaves when you go, oh, no, I'm going to build the world I actually want. And I'm actually going to be active in creating it, and not just saying like, the world is a certain way and you just have to accept that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want us to check in one more time. And I want you to ask yourself, what are the things that you value the most? So for me, one of the things that I value the most is equality. I value everyone's voice. I believe that everyone's voice should be heard, that no one should ever be silenced. I value, my biggest value is the value of love, that we're all loving to each other, right? And does your life actually reflect that? And for me, I had to say it didn't, because I would allow my voice to be silenced, and I would allow myself to have unloving thoughts towards people because of the lack of boundaries. And I had to look at, do my current boundaries actually allow me to live out my values? And they didn't. So I would love for you to ask yourself that. Do your current boundaries allow you to live out your actual values? And if they don't, if you're really honest, what values are you living out right now? So if I take the value of each person's voice being heard, I wasn't living that way. And so I was actually living in a world that said hierarchy is okay, that some voices are more important than others. And if you think that's only going to stay with you, we're sorely mistaken, because the truth is, if that's our value that we're living by, it's going to branch out into other people, right? And that happened to me when I had my kids. once I had my kids, I realized I started silencing their voice. Right? So they'd be playing with one of their little friends and they would have a little, you know, maybe not an altercation, but like a little argument or something. And I would say to my boys, no, you know, just let them. No, it's okay. You're fine. Don't speak up. Don't say your needs. And I'm like, oh my word, I'm doing this not only to myself, but I'm doing it to them. So the values that we live by, they're going to get put out into the greater world. So check in with yourself. What are the things you value the most? Does your life reflect that? Are your current boundaries allowing you to live out those values? And if you're really honest, what values are you actually living by? And I'll give you another minute to really reflect on that, because very often, while you're writing, I'll just mention, very often what we say are our values are actually our ideals. So when I said, I think every voice matters, that was my ideal, right? But my actual value was a value of hierarchy. And that can be a really hard thing to realize about yourself. And that's why it's so much easier just to go along life with no boundaries. It's so much easier than having to actually look at yourself and go, oh, shoot, there's some work that needs to be done here. And then the last question is, I want you to think about the changes that you want to make in your life. And are they possible with your current boundaries? This thing that you want to do with your life, is that actually going to happen if you stay with the boundaries that you have? And the truth of the matter is, boundaries are constantly changeable, right? We have boundaries when we're young that look a certain way, but as we age, our boundaries change. So maybe you have great boundaries in some areas, but they still need updating if you're going to be going into a new path or on a new journey. All right, does anyone want to share? Is everyone living by their values?
It's Darlene, Meg, and
Yes, hi, Darlene.
I am so glad that I signed up for this morning. It's right on spec as to what's happening in my life.
Oh.
Love it. I'm answering your questions, and I'm going, on the first one you had, I'm going quite often. And then I'm going quite often, and I really have to go into quiet mode and analyze what I'm really feeling, and then go from there. And then in these questions, I'm reevaluating my boundaries.
Yeah.
And some I want to increase, some I want to decrease. And boundaries do give powers. And the power gives you the intuition to talk, so that your intuition comes forward instead of being suppressed. It starts to speak out. So your body, mind, and spirit are all saying, hey, thank you very much. I'm coming to life, and I'm getting born. And I'm getting born. And I mean, this is really interesting, because when I signed up for this course, what the hell am I getting into on this one? But it's right on, because it's right on to what I'm feeling. And there's the negative and the positive out there, but by God, I'm going to get through it. And I'm a survivor. And I think you have to have that survival mode in your psyche that has to come out.
Totally.
And you have to decide, I'm going to bring it out, and I'm going to survive.
Yeah.
I will survive. I am alive. Isn't that a song?
That does sound like a song.
That's a great song.
That's so true. And here's the interesting thing, that connection, that connection with that inner self is absolutely what you do need to survive, right? Because that's the thing that guides us, especially if we're making changes, and especially if we're reevaluating our life, going, okay, I'm going to be doing something different now. We need to be fully connected, because we need to know that our steps are actually in tune with our desires and with what's good for us and all that stuff. And if we don't have boundaries, and we're inundated with the voice of other people and serving and caring for other people and not listening, we're going to continue to make choices that lead us down a path that really isn't positive for us. And in 10 years or in 5 years or in 2 years, we're going to go, wait, how did I get here again? I thought I was going to make these big changes. I thought things were going to be different this time, and then they're not, right? So I love what you're sharing. Absolutely. So powerful. Does anyone else?
I'm in the process, Meg. This is
Okay.
a process. I'm in the process.
Yeah.
And people are not happy with me.
Yeah.
But then I'm not happy with them either.
Well, and we're going to get to further on. We're going to get to some what happens when people aren't happy with us. So we'll get into that as well. So that's awesome. I love that. Does anyone else want to share?
So this year I told myself to say no more. I wish I did, because sometimes no is better than just say yes and regret it later. So I can give you an example. So I astrophysicist I met casually in Vancouver. He lives in Hawaii. He wanted me to take over all the requirement. And then initially I said yes. And then I had to use my connection to help him with his house. And then he didn't appreciate me. So had I said no to him, and then we still have that relationship.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. And if we connect with that inner knowing might have let us know, oh, this is a bad step for me. This is actually a step that I shouldn't be taking, right? So absolutely, that boundary of I'm not always going to say yes, right? I'm going to first check in. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. All right, we'll keep moving. So if you can relate to any of this stuff, then the chances are you fall into one of four, or more than one of four boundary patterns. And so the first boundary pattern is the compliant pattern. And this is when we say yes to things that are bad, so to speak. And this is exactly what you were talking about, Chloe, right? We say yes to things even though, you know, they're not in our best interest, or they're not actually something that we want to do. And this is definitely, or was definitely, my pattern. This, yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do this. And constantly overwhelming myself with all the things I needed to do for other people, because I found it so impossible to say no. And we often fall into this pattern if, as children, we're taught it's not okay to say no, or we think that it's bad, or we're taught that it's bad or wrong, or that it will disappoint others by not doing what they want us to do. And here's the devastating result of that, is that we turn into a chameleon. And when we're a chameleon, we just adapt ourselves to all these different situations. And it's this complete, it's this complete loss of self, right? And so for myself, I remember being in my early 20s and really just having a loss of self and not knowing and just walking through life kind of going, I just am whoever I am in front of this person at this time, and that can change at any moment, right? And so if you're in this pattern, you take on too much, you give too much, and you have way too few boundaries. And there's a reason you do this, and this is the pattern that's full of fear. So they're really all full of fear, but this one especially, I find. You are afraid of hurting someone's feelings. You're afraid of abandonment. You're afraid of someone's anger or punishment. You fear being ashamed or being seen as bad. And you feel guilty when you take care of your own needs. So that might sound like you. And if it doesn't, you may be in boundary pattern number 2, which is the avoidant pattern. And this is when we say no to the good. So you find it very hard to ask for help, or to recognize your own needs, or to let other people in. This is when, if you need something, you're likely to withdraw, and your boundaries are more like walls than boundaries, right? So if you have a need, you just put it up and nothing is allowed to come in. And you feel resentful and unsure of how to meet your own needs, or even what your own needs are. And the funny thing is, I'm not going to get choked up, but I do want to share this story. My brother, I just found out, has an avoidant pattern. And this is how we found out. For the last 1.5 years, he has had seizure and stroke symptoms that he never told us about. And that he would go into a private space if he felt like they were coming on, and just sort of take care of himself, and put himself in very dangerous situations, and went to work and all these things, and was experiencing these symptoms, but never said anything, because he went, I don't want to burden someone. I don't want to, make anyone do anything extra for me. And just this past weekend, actually, he was driving with his 16-year-old son, and he started to go into a full-on seizure stroke type symptom. they're not exactly stroke and seizure. They're not that, but there's symptoms like it, and ended up having to have his 16-year-old son grab the wheel and have to like navigate the road trying to get them to a safe place. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what an extreme example of what an avoidant pattern is like, right? When we just say no to the good, no to someone that wants to maybe help us, and we keep that love out that could be there for us. So that might be a pattern that you're in, but if you're not, there's more. I feel like there's more under behind door number 3.
Is he okay? Is he okay, Meg?
He's in the hospital now.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, he's in the hospital now, and we'll be staying there until they can figure it out, because they've taken his drivers away and he can't work and any of that stuff. So we're just very, very, very happy that that we know now. So, but one thing I should say about the compliant and the avoidant pattern is the chances are you hear both yourself in both of those, because when you're a compliant or when you're an avoidant, normally you pick the other one up as well. And so you normally will have no boundaries where you actually need them, and you have lots of boundaries where you actually should. And then you subconsciously take on this idea that other people should reach out to help you, even though you never communicate your needs, which is the perfect path into victimhood. So I know this from experience. Unfortunately, myself, I walked into that path of victimhood and just went like, look at how much I give and look at how no one does anything for me, not realizing that I had actually contributed to making that world myself. But then there's boundary pattern number 3, which is the controller. So in this boundary pattern, you just don't respect anyone's boundaries, right? And we resist taking control of our own lives. And so we need to control others. We don't hear no, and we tend to say, you know what, if change is going to come, it's going to come from outside of myself. So this is the boundary where we say, if we want change, if that person was different, then I wouldn't be like this. Or, you know, if only my husband would pick up after himself, then our house wouldn't be so messy. So we're constantly expecting the behaviors of other people to change, instead of going, well, wait a minute, maybe there's something that I'm responsible for here. And when this gets really difficult is when it's imbued with some aggression or control or manipulation, which then can really quickly put you into a relationship where you can experience some abuse and stuff like that. So this one is quite a tough one. But this can often happen with a boss that gives you work, even though you're exhausted, you're tired, you've worked overtime, you don't have the time, but he continues to load you up with work. This can be the parent that says, of course you're coming for supper tonight, right? And you go, well, no, actually I can't. Well, why wouldn't you? I'm so hurt. Oh, you don't care about me, right? That controller, that your behavior is going to determine my happiness. So you need to behave a certain way without any regard to maybe what your boundary might be. The next boundary pattern, is the non-responsive pattern. So this is someone who just totally doesn't respect the needs of others and is critical and judgmental of the fact that you might even have needs. And so this is what was happening to me when I was saying no to the babysitting of other people's children, because my kids were in school. They were very critical. Like, why wouldn't you do this? You've always done this. What do you mean you want to, you have this dream? Like, why would you even want to become that, etc. So this is what I found myself experiencing quite a bit. And the funny thing is, big surprise, people who are controlling are often non-responsive, and people who are non-responsive are often controlling. So those two go really, really, really well together. So you can see the first two go well together and the second two go well together, and you wouldn't believe what happens. Those two types of people attract each other because the one who wants to take care of everybody else's responsibility and just always says yes, somehow manages to attract someone who says, yeah, for sure, take care of my responsibilities, and I'm just going to tell you what to do, and that I will control you. So let's take a moment and let's check in and say, where in your life do you think you fall in these different patterns? Can you see yourself in one of them? And if you can, and there's another person in that scenario, which patterns do they fall into?
Hi, it's Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Well, I'm definitely the compliant.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I'm compliant in my relationship with my husband, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say he is the, what was the controlling one?
Yes, the controller avoidant or controller non-responsive. Sorry.
Yeah, I would say he's more, yeah, the controller, non-responsive. So that's been a real challenge because we've been together 36 years.
Wow.
And we separated for 5.
Mm-hmm.
And we were married 9, separated 5, been back together, I think 18, if that adds up to
Wow.
36. But it's been a really interesting evolution because his ability to change has been limited.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had to really navigate differently in the way that I manage his rigidity, I guess, because it doesn't come from a place of nastiness or spite. It just comes from a place of lack of awareness. His insight is not, his self-insight's not great. And when I bring to his attention that this is how he's coming across, he's very aware and apologetic, but the changes don't occur. And it's that transition from banging my head against the wall with him all the time, or I've found I either disengage and go, you know what, honey, probably not a good conversation that we're going to have here. So let's wait until I've eaten or you've slept. Or, yeah, because I've just found that if I try and turn the Titanic, I just am exhausted. It's emotionally and physically draining for me. And it turns out to be way worse of it'll become an argument. And it'll become way worse of a situation than if I find now that I just, it's kind of a good compliance, I guess, I put myself into, if that makes sense.
You know what, Sarah, I am loving your story and I am nodding my head because I feel like you are describing my story. My husband was a controller non-responsive, and my husband lacked awareness because my husband is high functioning autism. So he has a tinge of Asperger's in him, which means he is socially unaware. So that means,
because I swear my husband has adult ADHD or something, because I say to him so many times, honey, your sticky thinking is kicking in.
Yeah. So I totally 100% can feel with you and understand where you're coming from, and definitely ran into those experiences as well, and thought to myself that if I was compliant, that it just kept the water smooth and it was worth it.
Yes.
And I think what you maybe realized, and I know what I realized I've been married to my husband for 20 years. So we're going on 21 soon. But I realized after 12 years, I couldn't do it anymore. And so after 12 years, we had what we call in our relationship, the giant upheaval. we gave it a name where all this stuff that we're talking about today came up and just exploded. And we had to figure things out the hard way because it feels like you're okay with it. But if you were honest with yourself, you might say, I'm not as okay as I think I am, because I am literally, and maybe this is not true for you, but for myself, this was true. I was literally molding my life to make sure that I was doing things that kept the water not ruffled for him. That was a really mixed metaphor. Water doesn't ruffle, but you know what I mean?
Yes,
You know what I mean?
I do.
Right? So I was constantly modifying things in our house and in our home and in our life just to make sure that I didn't get him in a scenario of being upset, because if he was upset, then that just created a lot of problems. So really I wasn't happy. And
yeah,
so,
that's so true, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And so I know the idea of maybe it's a healthy compliant might sound really great. And I definitely know I've been there going like, oh, it's going to be okay. The truth of the matter is a compliant pattern is always going to hurt, because it's always going to make you put someone else before your own needs. And it's going to kill your attachment to your inner knowing, that inner self that you have. And that's going to do damage in the long run. So as we go through this, hopefully you're going to find some information that's really, really helpful for you. And I'm going to share a little bit of my story with my husband. And so hopefully that might be something that resonates with you. If not, I would love to hear more of your story a little later on, because I just feel like you're describing my life.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so funny, isn't it? To experience or to hear someone else experiencing it. So I think just to wrap it up, it sounds like I've moved from sort of a compliant to control, like I don't know what because it's different now. So because I've made the changes as well. And so it's maybe I've become a little bit more, I don't know what the assertive one was, but I've moved into a balance between compliant and another one, because I find the compliant portion is great for my mental health, but now it's been a way of saying, hey, you know what? Too bad you're not okay with that. And I am not going to engage with you. And it's so funny how you don't give them the platform. It really fizzles out very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what you're going to want to dig into is am I giving myself a false sense of control, or am I actually putting in healthy boundaries? Because those two things are very different. Because if I control my environment completely and make sure that the waters never get unsettled, that's a better metaphor.
Yes.
The waters never get unsettled, I can feel a false sense of control. But those aren't boundaries.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Right?
And I've been there. I've been there. I know what that feels like.
Yeah. So as we go through this, I'd love to keep checking in with you and see what you think. And hopefully if you have questions at the end, I would love to answer some of them for you as we go through this, and see what you find, because this is going to be fascinating. I'm going to be excited about your journey. Does anyone else want to share something? Anyone else find themselves somewhere? Okay. If not, I'll move on, because I'm watching the time and realizing I'm talking a long time. Okay. So I would love to give you an example of my own life where I had an issue with my husband and how we communicated. And my husband, God bless him, allows me to tell this story. He's so sweet. But I grew up in an environment where we were allowed to talk, right? We were allowed to communicate, and everyone had an equal voice. My husband grew up in an environment where his dad is a pastor of a mega church, and they had a very, very strict religious upbringing. And so the man was the one who spoke, and everyone else listened. And so when we got married, that sort of was the expectation that he placed, very naturally, because it's what he had seen in our relationship. And so if he would come inside and he would want to tell me something, he'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking this and I'm thinking this. And I would expect to have an equal voice. He would very quickly go, excuse me, I'm not done talking. I will let you know when I'm done. And I was like, wait, what? Or I would say, oh, well, I think, and he would go, well, that's just actually not what I'm needing right now. So I just need you to listen. And it really made me feel so small and so little. But what I did is I just molded myself. I just went, oh, okay. So then I would sit there and not say anything and really just, be quiet. And then I would notice he would do it with other people. And so I'd go, oh, that doesn't reflect well on him. And so I would go and I would make it right. Like I would go and correct the situation. So if I heard him do it with a friend, I'd, slide up later and just be like, hey, James is kind of stressed out today. Like, don't take it personally that he talked like that. Or, if he was talking to someone in my family like that, I'd just be like, well, like whatever. And I'd make excuses for him. And this is just how I would fix things behind the scenes, always making sure that everything was okay. And he was able to just kind of go and be whoever he wanted to be, never realizing that he was actually causing damage or hurt. And I thought it was okay. I thought that was marriage until we had our boys. And I started seeing him do that to the boys. And I went, oh, this is not okay. Like you just have that mother's instinct where you're like, you know what? I can't, I'm not going to have my kids' voices silenced like this. I have to say something. So I got up the courage and I psyched myself up, which is what you have to do if you're a compliant avoidant. And I went up to him the next time he was talking to me like that. And I said, you know what? You are never going to speak to me like that again. I am so done. That is unacceptable. You are not going to speak to me like that. And guess what his response was? He totally freaked out. It did not go well. He was so angry. He was like, how dare I try to control him? How dare I speak to him that way? Didn't I understand, his autism? Didn't I understand what his parents had made him feel like? How could I be so selfish? So that controller side just whoosh, reared its ugly head. And in the past, I would have caved in and I would have gone, oh, okay, I'm so sorry. I apologize or whatever. And I thought, no, this time for my kids, I'm going to stick with it. And guess what happened? Nothing. Because I made a giant mistake. And that is a huge misconception that we all tend to have about boundaries. And that is that boundaries are something that we put on someone else. So when we think that boundaries are something that we put on something else, what's really important to realize is that is not a boundary, because you cannot enforce it. A boundary has to be enforceable. And when I said to James, you can't do this to me anymore, I had no way of making him comply. I had no way of enforcing anything that would make him change his behavior. And what that actually was is me just trying to gain some control. And so often we mix those two up. We say, oh, this is a good boundary. And actually what it is it's control. And if you try to control someone, you will always damage the relationship in the long run, right? And the resentment grows. And when you try to control someone, and when that resentment grows, that kills love. There's nothing that kills love faster than resentment and control. So even if his behavior was wrong, which it was, that desire for me to control him, the fact that he rebelled against that desire was actually a positive thing, because we shouldn't allow control in our lives. So even though his behavior was wrong, the fact that he was fighting against that control was actually right. And so this is something so fascinating. We do this all the time. When we think we're setting a boundary, we say, I'm never going to accept this again. I'm never going to let them do this again. They have to change this, never realizing that that's actually control. So I would love, oh, wait, hold on. So how do you know it's control? Well, you know it's control when you don't respect their no's. You know it's control when you're going to punish them for a wrong choice. You know it's control when you don't value their freedom to make a mistake or a choice that they want to make, and you're more concerned with them doing the right thing. And you know it's control when you're expecting them to make all the changes, them to do all the work. And when your relationship is full of resentment, acting out, and retaliating. So that definitely did not work. I would love to hear from you guys. Have you ever tried to put in a boundary and now go, oh, now that I'm thinking about it, I was trying to control their behavior. That wasn't actually really a boundary, which we're going to get into next. That was actually just me trying to control. Not so much. Am I the only one? That's all right. We'll keep going then. That's totally fine. All right, hold on. I just got to give myself the chance to. Okay. So how do you know it's actually a boundary? Well, it's actually a boundary when we place a limit on ourselves. So in the situation with James, when I said, you are never allowed to talk to me that way anymore, you need to change, that was control. But when I put the boundary on myself, I went, I don't participate in this type of situation. And I don't allow this in my life and in my relationships. So that was a boundary that I was placing on myself, on what I would accept, and on what I would participate in. And the change that needed to happen was in me. So you know it's a great boundary when it's really clear on what we're responsible for. We're all responsible for our own feelings, our own attitudes, our own behavior, our own choices, our own limits, our own desires, thoughts, and values. So I am responsible for those things. A great boundary also protects us. It allows us to take harmful things and eliminate them from our life. It allows us to continue to be loving, which is super important, because before I placed a great boundary in place in our communication, I found that I was consumed with not being loving. It empowers us. So it gives us choices, because how often when you don't have a boundary, you go, I don't have a choice. I have to, I don't have a choice. And this was going, no, you do have a choice. I am in control of this. And it helps us live our values. Like I was talking about at the beginning of our talk, I value every voice, and I wasn't living that out in my own life. And it helped me to build character. So this lack of strength that I had in using my own voice, this very thing that I said I valued so much, I didn't have the strength to use. And so to actually go, I have to build some character here in order to take some rejection, in order to take some negative feedback so that I can actually use my voice, was a huge thing for me. So if you have a boundary, it'll probably cause you to grow in your character. And the other thing that it did that was really amazing is that it stopped me from thinking that James had to act a certain way for me to be okay. It put me in charge of being okay. And I stopped looking at him in terms of just how he affected me. And instead, I started to see him as a human being, not just this is how he relates to my life, but that this is who he is as a human being. And this is where his character may need to grow a little bit. And Sarah, it reminds me a little bit of when you say your husband lacks awareness. If you don't fix things for him, it causes him to be placed in a situation where he has to gain awareness. Otherwise, the suffering or the pain will become too great for him, which is a wonderful thing, which is actually a beautiful thing. I know we think, oh no, we don't want the people around us to suffer or to feel pain, but pain is growth, right? And so me being able to look at him as an individual and say, what is the best thing for him here? The best thing for him here is that he learned to communicate better. And the worst thing that I could do for him, the most unloving thing that I could do for him, is to make up for his deficiency here, because it causes him to lack in character. So that was a huge eye opener for me. And so I tried again. And I went up to him with a completely different way of communicating. And I actually wrote it out for you guys because I remember writing it out then. And I thought, okay, what did I write out? And I remember, and this is what I had said to him. I said, honey, I love you like crazy and I want to be close to you. But there's something that's making it difficult for me. And I want you to know that I'm going to make some changes. So I'm taking responsibility. When you tell me about your ideas and you get excited, I know that it's because you value my ability to listen to you and to give you feedback. When that excitement causes you to talk over me, I find I get resentful and I find myself pulling away from you. And that is not what I want. So I realized that if I'm going to be close to you and keep myself loving you, I can't participate in a conversation where that happens anymore. Instead, I'm just going to take a break from our conversation, or we can talk about something else until I'm ready to listen. If you want to make this easier for me, I would love it if you would give me time to respond to the things you're saying, but that's your choice. Do you hear how different that is in comparison to, hey, you can never do that to me again, right? Can you hear how I'm taking responsibility for the things that are in my life? I'm taking responsibility for my actions. I'm taking responsibility for my needs instead of saying it's all on you. And that's what a boundary really is. A boundary is really revealing to us, this is what we're responsible for. This is the power in us. Does that make sense? All right. So how do we find our boundaries? Our boundaries, like if you're thinking, okay, I want to make some changes, Meg, you have me convinced I need to place in some boundaries. I get the difference between boundaries and control. Where do I find my boundaries? How do I know which ones I actually need? Well, our boundaries are delivered to us in a number of ways, but most often you can find them in your body, in the way your body responds to different situations. You can find them in your emotions, in your feelings and moods, in your thoughts and words, and in your energy level. So my body's response when James would start talking like that to me in a disrespectful way would just be to shrink, like just, oh, right? You all know that feeling when you go, my stomach is clenching and I feel this small, you feel that heat rising up on your neck and you're just like, pay attention. Something has been crossed there for you. Really listen into that and cue into that. Like, oh, okay, this is something that I'm really uncomfortable with. I probably need to put something in place here, right? Our emotions, feelings, and moods. So it's really interesting because the emotion is the quick thing. The feeling is once we've placed a story with it, and then the mood becomes our habitual way of being, right? And so the minute that the emotion hit me, that shame, that feeling of being small, that feeling of resentment, like, oh, you know, I needed to clue into that before it became a feeling or a mood, which I didn't do. I let it become a mood. But in the end, what ended up happening was if he would come in, sometimes I'd go, oh, he's home. Can you imagine thinking that about your own husband? Oh, he's home. I know he's going to want to talk to me about his day. Like actually dreading that part of the day, that's a clue in. If you are at work and you have a coworker or with a parent or with a child even, or with anyone, and you start to go, you know, your mood just drops when they're around, that's a cue in that you need to put in a boundary, that something is really, really wrong. Our thoughts and our words, exactly. right? He would walk in the door and my thought and my words would be, he's home. That's a cue in, right? Like instead of saying, oh, I'm excited about this, or I'm interested in hearing what he's going to say, oh, what's going on? Sorry, guys, I don't know what happened there, but I'm going to close that and get back to here. Okay. Oh, I don't know why this is happening.
Minimize that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying and it's not letting me. Hold on, I'm just going to stop screen sharing for 1 second and I'm going to get rid of that because I don't know why it would do that. I must be getting some emails in and okay. Am I back?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Okay.
No, you're back.
I'm back. Okay. Awesome. We're going to get there eventually. Technical difficulties. Okay. Awesome. And now I just need to move this so I can present again. There we go. Okay. Oh, yeah. Please do that. There we go. Yeah, and also our energy level, right? The fact that I would have that energy drop or not be motivated in order to actually do something with him, right? Those are all clear signs that something is up. Okay, so now let's get to the exciting part. Let's get to the actual setting boundaries, okay? So you're cluing into your body, you're cluing into where you need because you're listening to yourself finally instead of listening to everyone else. And what do we actually do? So there's 9 steps to actually creating your new boundary. And it's 1, get clear on exactly what you want your boundary to be. So often what happens is if you have a no, that can turn into your yes. So my no was, I don't want to be talked down to anymore. And then my yes became, I want every voice to matter. I want every voice to have its time. So turning your no into a yes can be a huge way of finding out what you want your boundary to be. The other thing that really works well, if you're a little bit more into this type of thing, is a call and answer method, where you actually take some time to go off by yourself and do a call and answer. So you call to yourself, what is it that you want here? And you listen, and then you ask a question, and then you listen. And so that's something for people who are inclined to do it that way. That works really, really well. Then you need to decide, what type of boundary is this? Is it a physical boundary? So a boundary like, I need the house to look a certain way. Could you please help me tidy it up? Or is it an emotional boundary where, could you call my mom for me because I'm too worried to talk to her. So you need to take care of someone's emotions. Or is it a relational boundary like with my husband where, hey, you know what, you can't talk to me like that. So figure out what type of boundary is this so that you have that clarity. Then be clear on what you need to have this, or why you need to have this boundary here. What is it going to create? And what is it going to protect you from? So my boundary created a space where my husband and I could both communicate better, and it would protect me from that resentment and that dislike, to be honest, that I was starting to feel from him. The second thing to get clear on is pay and play is what it's called, but it's basically, what am I responsible for in this situation? So my husband got to play, right? He didn't have to think about the consequences, and I had to pay. So he didn't have to worry about, what are the consequences of the way I'm speaking, because I would go and pay the bills for him, right? I'd pay the bills, if you know what I mean. Like I would go make sure that everyone wasn't upset with him, and I would make sure that I, repressed all my upset down so that he wouldn't realize it, et cetera, et cetera. So really going, who's playing in this situation and who's paying, right? You need to decide, how am I going to show up to meet these responsibilities? Like, I'm not going to actually do the extra work at work, or I'm not going to call your mom for you, or I'm not going to participate in this kind of conversation. How am I actually going to show up? The 6th thing is, what are you motivated by? Are you motivated by fear, or are you motivated by love? So if I was motivated by fear with James, I would have said something, or I would have thought something like, yeah, see, I never get to talk, and that's not fair. Right? That's a fear response that, oh, my needs aren't getting met, so I need to change things. Whereas a love response would be, it's healthy for a relationship to be able to do this. And I love him enough to want to build a healthy relationship for him. The next thing you need to do is decide, what are you going to do if your boundary does not get met? And for me, it was change the subject or take a break from the conversation. So it might be something completely different for you. And what I have found is that deciding what your first consequence is and then deciding what your second one is really better, because you're going to need, if someone is really not interested in meeting your boundaries, you're going to need to have a progression for it to be more and more uncomfortable for them to not meet that boundary. The 8th thing is deciding if your boundary will cause pain or injury. So when James talked over me, it was injuring. But when I held my boundary, it was painful for us, but we got better. So it's like I was saying before, pain causes growth, which is fantastic. And we were growing. Injury, on the other hand, breaks the relationship down. So you have to say, this boundary, is it creating injury in the relationship, or is this creating just pain? And pain, yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's actually going to be something that's really, really great for us. And then the next thing is communicate your boundary clearly, which is what we're going to talk about next. Does that make sense to everyone? I feel like I want to ask for questions, but if you have questions, just write them down. And then at the end, because I want to make sure that we have time for them. But I also know that I need to keep going. So, okay. So one of the things, actually, you know what? I'm going to move on from that one just because I know that I am on a little bit of a time crunch. I talk too long every time. It's always how I am. So for those of you,
it's fascinating, Meg, so don't worry.
okay, because I'm like, oh, shoot, I need to put a boundary in place for how long I talk. Oh, shoot. Okay, so if we are going to communicate our boundary, there's 2 things to make sure we don't do, and then there's a bunch of things to make sure that we do. So the first thing is make sure your message isn't contaminated. So your energy has to match your words, right? Like if I was motivated by love for my husband to put my boundary in place. So my energy needed to reflect that. So when I said, honey, I love you and I want to be close to you, those 2 things matched, right? And so if I would have been upset and gone, you know what, honey, I want to be close to you, but it's almost impossible to be, that energy doesn't match the message, right? So you're wanting to make sure that those 2 things actually match. The other thing is you want to make sure it's a full message, not a partial message. So when I went up to my husband the first time and I said, you are never going to speak to me like that again, that was a partial message. There was so much I wasn't saying. And when I actually sat down and wrote it out, as dorky as that might sound, that I actually had to write my request out, it did allow me the opportunity to create a full message for him. And the full message needed to have what my loving intentions were, and what the other person's good intentions were. Because here's the thing, the chances are the other person is not trying to hurt you. Unless, even if it's your mother saying, why don't you come? Like my mother does, whom I love dearly. The intentions aren't bad. Her desire is to be close to me, right? And so to really look for, what is this person's good intention here? And to communicate that you understand that good intention. Then to clearly communicate what your desire is. I want to be close to you, right? If you remember from my example with my husband, my desire is to be close to you. And then here's what I'm responsible for. I'm responsible for not allowing what you're doing into my life, because you have the freedom to act however you want. I'm not going to control you. You have that freedom to act as you want, but I also have that freedom not to accept that. And I'm choosing to actually use that freedom. Then to state clearly what it is that you need and how you're going to be meeting that need. So I'm going to need to be in a relationship where we communicate clearly and honestly to each other without talking over each other. And I'm going to meet that need by removing myself from the conversation when that happens, or changing the subject to something less volatile, right? And then let them know, how has your lack of boundary negatively affected you? This has made me have a really hard time loving you. This has made it really difficult for me to feel close to you. And then let them know how they're going to benefit from your boundary. So here's the thing, I'm going to be able to give you better feedback. I'm going to be able to love you more. I'm going to be able to, create better work. So even for an employer who's trying to say, work extra hours, here's the thing. I would love to work these extra hours for me, but I know that even if I work the extra hours, I'm not giving you my best work. But if I keep the work contained in this amount of hours, you're going to be getting the best out of me. And I think that that's actually the priority here, to get my best work, not just to get any work, right? So to communicate, how are they benefiting from this boundary? And then the last thing, and I have to apologize, I didn't put it on the slide, but to let them know how they can help you, right? And to realize that you can't be attached to that, but to put it out there. So I said to my husband, if you want to help me by pausing so I can respond to you and not just talking over, like, that's very helpful. You don't have to change, but if you want, you can, right? So just putting that out there, that they would have the opportunity to help you. So how will other people respond to your boundary? Well, from the women that I work with, most people have the experience that the people in their lives don't respond well. And it's really important to take a few things into consideration. One, they're coming from a place of fear because they know you a certain way and they're used to you behaving a certain way, and your behavior has met their needs in a certain way, and you're now threatening that. So that's where that negative energy can sometimes come from. And that's okay. You just have to have that patience to work through that with them and say, you know what, this is actually going to benefit us. This is actually going to be great for us. It's also revealing their character. And that can be extremely hard to face. Like my husband was extremely upset when he had to face, I've been a really crappy communicator for a huge chunk of my life. He had to face that and went, and I've hurt people? Like what? And that made him want to sort of lash out and go, no, that can't be true. No, that can't be true. And it took him a while before he went, oh my word, you're right. And now, yeah, well, I won't go into now because I'll keep that for the end. And they're going to feel the pain for being responsible for themselves. It's really hard to be responsible for yourself. It's much easier to say you're responsible for my happiness and you need to act a certain way in order for me to be happy. And to feel that pain of, oh crap, that's me, that can feel very, very, very uncomfortable. And so just to remember that when they act badly. And this is the truth. Having boundaries does not mean that we won't suffer. It just means that we're suffering for the right reason. At least we're doing that hard work of becoming better people. That's still painful, but it's a much more beneficial pain than the pain of me going, oh, I don't want my husband to come home because I don't want to have these conversations. That was really an uncomfortable pain. Whereas the pain of going, yeah, we're going to get better at communicating because this is my boundary. That was painful, but it was a much better pain. It was a much more well-serving pain. And then the last thing is be prepared for consequences. People that you're in a relationship with that don't like your boundary change will test you again and again and again and again. My husband, when I would first, because at first I said, okay, I'm not participating in these types of conversations, and he would still do it because I didn't require him to change, right? I was requiring myself to change. And so he would start and I would change the subject. And he would get upset and he would go, you know what? Fine. You don't want to talk about it? I don't care. I'm not going to talk to you. And he would just ignore me and I have to tell you, my husband is so lovely. I mean, I feel bad telling these stories about him from before the upheaval, but he's okay with it. So I do it. But he's such a lovely guy. If you ever met him, you'd fall in love with him right away. But so it's cute that I have to tell these stories. But he would be like, okay, fine. I'm not talking to you. And he wouldn't talk to me for the rest of the evening. And for me, I'm an Enneagram 9. If you've ever done the Enneagram, that kills me to have someone create conflict in my house. Oh, that just is death to me. And I had to sit there and go I am okay if he doesn't talk to me. I am okay. I accept those consequences. So be prepared for consequences. Now, what happens if you do all this stuff and they still don't respect your boundaries? Whether you can sit down with them or whether you can do your own deep work about what you can imagine, it's great to ask them or yourself about them these questions. Is this triggering something for them? So for my husband, not being listened to triggered how his dad made him feel, right? So I was asking a really big change. It might seem like a small change, just don't be a jerk and talk to me that way. That's how it seemed on my end. But on his end, it was, my dad never let me speak, and now I'm in my own house and I'm going to speak the way I want to speak and no one's going to control that. So it was really triggering a lot of that painful past, right? Another thing to ask is, do I need to be more clear on my communication? Maybe I haven't communicated this in a way that you understand it, which is fair. I maybe need to relook at that. What do you think will change? And what do you think this lack of boundary is helping you with? So for my husband, it was very easy for him to have relationships because I would clean everything up for him. So my lack of boundaries by cleaning things up for him was really beneficial to him, right? So really facing that and asking them to face that as well. And then, are you being clear on the harm that it's causing you? And is it clear the benefit that the relationship will have if this boundary is in place? And if push comes to shove, how can we prevent this from happening until we can work this out, right? Because sometimes it's such a hostile and difficult situation that it's okay, we're actually just going to avoid this until we can both do some personal development, some personal growth, and then we're going to come back and look at it again at a different time. And we've had situations like that in our relationship that happened. So you may be curious, what ended up happening to James in my communication? Did he eventually cave into my boundary? And the truth of the matter is, it was a really beautiful experience. We had months and months and months of difficulty, I'm not going to lie to you, that were really, really, really painful. And finally, he began to realize, oh, there's no way around this. This boundary is consistent. This woman who I'm attached to for the rest of my life is going to keep this boundary for the rest of her life. So he started to slowly do it less and less and less. And what the boundary did for me was it opened me up to using my voice more and more and more. In fact, I don't even think I'd be doing this today if I hadn't set that boundary in place way back then and said, my voice matters. And so it's been a really beautiful thing where our kids, who are now 15 and 13, they always go, you guys communicate so well. You communicate so well, which is really quite sweet and funny for us because we go, well, it was a real journey. So for us, it was a happy ending. If it isn't a happy ending, that means you have to do some really hard thinking about your choices.